1960s was a decade simultaneously fascinating and frustrating for Western fans. By the end of the decade, with the spaghetti Western in the ascendancy, revisionism was on the precipice, though that movement wouldn't come to full fruition until we passed into the 70s. For the classic Hollywood Western, these were the transitional years, the painful period in some ways, with the genre thrashing about in search of direction, the longing for a refined identity. Ultimately, revisionism would strip the genre down to the bone and train a probing searchlight on its innermost workings. Revisionist westerns are films that, in a whole or part, interrogate aspects of the genre, such as its traditional representations of history and myth, heroism and violence, masculinity and minorities. Called a post-classical variation of the traditional western, the revisionist subverts the myth and romance of the traditional by means of character development and realism to present a less simplistic view of life in the Old West. To examine one of those late 60s westerns that seemed to benefit from the turmoil of the time, Martin Ritt's Hombre is a film that avoids the outright nihilism often depicted in Euro westerns, retains the structure and moral complexity of the best 50s efforts, and looks forward to the bleak honesty of revisionism. In short, it becomes a kind of philosophical meditation on social responsibility. The classic Western protagonist has frequently been characterized as a loner, a man drifting along on the fringes of society for one reason or another. Such a ploy isn't accidental, of course. It allows us to connect with the spirit of freedom and individualism as a significant part of the Western's attraction, and also helps objectify the view of society and encroaching civilization. Generally though, the hero does feel himself drawn in some way towards the society he observes. Hombre presents us with John Russell, a white man raised by Apache who has categorically rejected the ways of his own race. Here we have a character who doesn't fit in with those he is supposed to. John Russell finds that the world is not so welcoming when he returns to his Arizona hometown to collect his inheritance. A white man raised by American Indians, Russell is subjected to numerous instances of racism when people discover his background. Locked within the confines of the bumpy stagecoach, the tensions and fears of this disparate little group simmers away just below the surface. The pressure comes to a head when they are held up on a remote part of the trail, and the truth about each one emerges. Abandoned in the wilderness and facing the very real prospect of perishing, they turn towards Russell to guide them out. But Russell is now in something of a quandary. Apart from the fact he'd been shunned due to his Apache affiliations, he feels no obligation towards his fellow man anyway. He's faced with a philosophical dilemma. Does he follow his head and leave these people to the fate he reckons they deserve? Or does he listen to that still distant voice within that urges empathy? Hombre is one of those films that sneaks up on you. It starts out quietly in the Arizona Badlands, where John Russell stealthily stalks and traps a herd of wild horses with two of his Indian companions. Upon reflection, the symbolism is striking. Russell, shortly after outsmarting the horses into captivity, is told that the man who came to care for Russell at some point in Russell's early life and gave Russell his name has died. The old man is willed to John a boarding house and a gold watch, both symbolic of settling back into the white world. The metaphorical question is whether John Russell will now be outsmarted into an alien cultural capacity, like the horses. He sits at the barrier between the white and the Indian cultures and lives as much as possible like his Apache friends, wild and free in nature. It's clear he considers the Apache his people, but with one foot in the white culture, and now with the inheritance, he's wondering about putting both feet back over there now. Arriving in town, he's adopted the outward appearance of his own people, but retains the cool detachment of the Apache. Essentially, Russell has made it his business to mind his own business, to have as little contact with the white world he has rejected as possible. If Stagecoach is an influence, so too is The Searchers, one of the elemental westerns in regard to race. It's not only that Hombre dramatises the racism endured by Native Americans, and to a different degree, Mexican Americans. It's that the movie depicts the American West as a collision of codes. What unites the heroes of Hombre, and there aren't many, is their capacity for mercy, not the colour of their skin. The characters of Hombre are put to this test when the stagecoach is ambushed by outlaws and the passengers escape into the wilderness. Previously disdainful of Russell, they voted to make him sit up top with the driver. They now must rely on him to survive. All action, even calculated inaction, has its consequences. In a sense, it's Russell's single-minded detachment that lays the groundwork for what follows. The sale of the boarding house effectively acts as the catalyst that finally pushes at least one man towards crime, and Russell's own determination to avoid intervention in the affairs of others ensures that a bullying outlaw Grimes gets to ride the stage. The script raises interesting questions about how much we owe others, how far we should go for those we deem undeserving of our sympathy, and whether intervention or isolation is the correct approach. Russell not only knows that assisting the abandoned travellers will add to his own peril, but his years living outside of white society have meant that he no longer identifies with these people. Circumstances have resulted in his being caught in a countercultural purgatory where his head and heart are in conflict. In cinematic terms, this is a reflection of the position the Western itself was facing in 1967, with its soul and conscience pulling in one direction, while social and economic factors were pressuring it to go another way. If we count HUD, then Martin Ritt made 3 westerns with Paul Newman, and all of them have their points of interest. Adapted from Elmore Leonard's novel of the same name, Hombre is the closest to the traditional western. The basic structure owes much to John Ford's classic Stagecoach, but it's a much more cynical affair. The 2 films do share the vital element of spiritual redemption for their hero, but Ritt's movie reaches that point in a more tragic and bitter way. There's a quiet potency to Newman's performance. I think the stillness of the man, the eternal patience of his Apache side, is perfectly captured, and yet a melancholy simmers beneath the surface. There's a great sense of his being aware of everything, absorbing the sounds, smells, and the moods around him, and storing them away. When he's aroused to action, there's a jarring abruptness to it that makes it all the more effective. The first instance takes place in a cantina, where Russell sits and calmly watches and listens to his Apache companions being goaded by 2 ignorant redneck types. We're expecting something, a reaction of some kind, maybe a rebuttal from this soft-spoken man, but the sudden swing of his rifle butt to shatter and drive the splinters of a whiskey glass into the face of the agitator is both shocking and satisfying. In a similar vein, the later eruption of aggression when he opens fire on Boone, when he comes to parley, is made more intense by the apparent calm that precedes. What sets Hombre apart, as in so many works of cinema, is the writing. Leonard brings universal impact to the behaviour of believable archetypes in an isolated, remote place where people stand out. The Stagecoach is a microcosm of humanity, with all its best and worst qualities. Collectively, they add up to a cross-section of frontier types, the outwardly respectable older man and his younger, disillusioned wife, a young couple coming to terms with the regalities of married life, the veteran driver who's long since bid farewell to his ideals, the woman who has been around and remains a survivor, the swaggering bully, and the enigma that is Russell. Richard Boone's crafty and cunning Grimes is the ideal foil to Newman's motionless and emotional Russell. He had a real poise for conveying a quiet threat. There was always the feeling that here was a man it would be foolish to cross. Frederick March plays the corrupt Indian agent, the one whose presence poses the greatest danger to the survival of the group. Essentially, he represents all that's wrong with the society that Russell has rejected. Despite portraying what appears as having no redeemable qualities, March manages to inject a strong deal of pathos for Barbara Rush's character, the disillusioned and essentially abandoned wife. Of the 3 female roles in the movie, Diane Cilento had the most substantial and the one with the greatest significance as Jessie. She played the most down-to-earth of the 3 women on that Stagecoach, and the one with the lowest social status. Russell's decision to sell up saw her out of a job and on the streets, with her spirit unbroken. The script offered her several opportunities to shine, and she took each one, displaying an earthy and attractive honesty. She was also fortunate to be playing the character, whose mentality the average viewer could most readily identify with, providing a kind of bridge between Newman's omnipotent aloofness and the self-interest of the others. She becomes the narrative's conscience, especially as the plot begins to hinge on whether or not Russell will strike out on his own, go with his survivalist instincts, or risk himself to protect this newfound community, including those who previously disdained him. She knows all too well the cost of living only for yourself. Hombre in the end honours the opposite, sacrifice.
It's not up to us to decide whether she deserves to live or not.
We only help, huh?
Do we have another choice?
Not help.
The characters of Hombre first become known to us and to one another in close quarters, and later we watch them become who they are through an intricate morality play on a desolate desert panorama. John Russell, whether intentionally or not, helps the passengers survive pretty well until the bandits present a moral dilemma. The Indian agent's cultured wife will die of thirst if Newman doesn't hand over the money the Indian agent stole from the Apaches. Russell's hesitation to help the Indian agent's wife can be seen as a reflection of his eternal conflict. As a man who has experienced prejudice and discrimination because of his mixed heritage, Russell embodies a sense of alienation from both the white and Native American communities. His reluctance to immediately assist the woman may stem from a deep-rooted distrust of the white society and its representations, as well as a desire to distance himself from his white heritage. Furthermore, Russell's hesitation can also be interpreted as a manifestation of his struggle to reconcile his conflicting loyalties. On one hand, he feels a strong sense of kinship with the Apache people and a disdain for the injustices they have suffered at the hands of the white settlers. On the other hand, he is aware of the moral obligation to help a fellow man being in distress, regardless of race or background. This moment underscores the film's exploration of themes such as identity, morality, and legacy of colonialism. It serves to highlight the eternal turmoil experienced by individuals who exist on the margins of society, caught between different worlds and struggling to find a place within them. Ultimately, John Russell's eventual decision to help the woman can be seen as a pivotal turning point in the personal journey, as it signifies a moment of moral reckoning and a willingness to confront the complexities of his own identity.
I don't know what your gripe is against the world. Maybe you got a real one.
Lady, up there in those mountains, there's a whole people who've lost everything. They don't have a place left to spread their blankets. They've been insulted, diseased, made drunk and foolish. Now, you call the men who did that Christians, and you trust them. I know them as white men, and I don't.
The final sequence begins with a violent confrontation between John and Grimes. As tensions rise and violence erupts, John's moral code and survival instincts are put to the test. The sequence is a masterclass in building tension and suspense, as the character's fate hang in the balance.
We all die, just a question of when.
As the dust settles and the danger subsides, the passengers are left to grapple with the aftermath of the violence. The moral ambiguity of the situation is brought to a forefront as the characters confront the choices they have made and the consequences of their actions. John in particular is forced to confront his own identity and the values that guide his actions. In a powerful and emotional moment, he chooses to make a selfless sacrifice that resonates with the film's themes of redemption and moral integrity. The final sequence of Hombre serves as a powerful resolution to the film's central conflicts. It showcases the complex and often harsh realities of life on the frontier, where moral choices are rarely clear-cut and the consequences of one's actions can be profound. Hombre continues to captivate audiences and stand as a testament to the enduring power of the Western genre. It develops the themes that socially and morally disparate types are often thrown into uneasy, explosive alliances due to emergencies. As a fascinating character study in itself, the film is indeed an examination of race and social cohesion, and also contextually, for the position it occupies in the development of the genre. Martin Ritt constructs a moving character piece that spiritually addresses the inner purgatory facing the Western at the time, metaphorically, like the cowboy who rides off through the sunset onto the next adventure. So too must the genre itself, and make way for a bleaker and more honest tomorrow.